we are going to continue on to set up our database and connect our database to our API. Just to catch you up, if it's been a while between the last video and this one, we have a button that I click on the button. It's going to send a request to the backend, and then it's going to console log the response. Okay. On the backend, you'll see a get route, and it's going to call the app service get hello, and then it's going to return hello world. So we should see hello world pop up on the screen when we click the button. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click, and yep, we get hello world. So our front end is connected to our back end. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do now is we are going to change the route that we have on the back end here, because right now it's a get request, but ultimately we want to send data to the back end. Okay, so when you send data to the back end that you then save in your database, you want to use a post request instead. So if I didn't know how to do a post request, I would type in post request nest.js, and I'd look at the documentation first. Okay, I would go through, I'm seeing get requests, more get requests. I see a post request here, but it doesn't send any data, so that's not exactly what I want yet. But I'm trying to figure out what, how one sends data with a post request in the body on Nest.js. So we will keep scrolling till we find a good example. All right, so here is an example of a post request that's being sent. Okay, so we are going to add that. We are going to import the post. We have to import body, and then we are going to change this because we're not creating a cat DTO. So we are going to say body, and body is going to be of type string. Right now we're just going to save one string. Okay, so then let's go ahead and console.log body and body. Okay, then we are going to return, yay. All right, let's take a look. All right, so I want to post, and then I'm going to add in my post a little route here. So when I do post name, okay, then it's going to hit this route. I'm going to call this function add name. Okay, and then I am going to console log the body of the request. So on the front end, I need to change it around a little bit. So right now when I'm clicking this, I'm hitting the hello world endpoint, right? So I need to change this. So I changed that to, what did I change it to? /name. So I'm posting a name. Okay, and I am posting this. I'm not getting it, so I'm going to change this to get to post. And then when we post, we also need to send an object with it. So I'm going to send the object name is equal to Callie. Okay, and I am going to clear my console, and I'm going to go ahead and click test connections. So this makes sense because I returned yay, so I see that yay is what got returned. So let's go check out my API console logs, and yeah, I see that the body that got sent is an object with one property name, and then value is equal to Callie. Okay, so that is one way that you can set up the body request or a body for your post request. The other way that you can do it is you can name it like this, where you would do body name, and then you would call this name, and then you would call this name. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this now. Make sure we get that set up right. And yeah, body is Callie. Response is yay. Okay, perfect. So when I'm going to go ahead and delete this get route, well, I'm not going to delete it, but I'm going to change it because I'm going to say eventually this is going to turn into get names. Okay, it's going to call the function app.service.get names. I'm just going to do a name table in the database and then put some names in. All right, so I need to change this to get names. And then I'm just going to make return an empty object right now. We also need to have a route for, we also need to create a function here for calling app_service.add_name. And we're going to send the name with it. Okay, so now we need to go create that corresponding function on the back end. So async, it's going to be async because we are going to use the database. So we're going to say async add name string, and then we are going to return, we'll just do an empty object right now. All right. Let's add a console.log name so we can check that this is all connecting right. All right, and we are going to do return 8. All right, so now I should send a name in. It's going to call the add name function in app service. It should console log, and then it should return an empty object. Okay, so I think we should probably return an empty object with the name in it, just for now. So the extra step is that in here we will then add the name to the database, but we're not there yet. Okay, so we're gonna test it. All right, yep, it returned name Callie, so that's good. And so now we know it's calling this because we also see our console log name Callie here. So that's good, okay. All right, so now we can start moving on to our database, okay? So in order to look this up, I would do nest.js. First, I'm going to do config database. I'm going to see what comes up. All right, so I'm going to look through this. So basically, you need to store your database credentials, and you would do that by storing them as environment variables. So you can use process.env in order to get them. So that way, when you push your code to GitHub, you are not pushing sensitive data. So instead of setting it up afterwards, I'm going to start with setting up the config. Okay. So I'm going to just scroll through real quick to make sure that this is something that I want. Okay. So they're setting up a config module. Okay. All right. This is not exactly what I want, so I think I might need to add Postgres, and I'm going to kind of keep looking because I want to make sure I get this, I find the right thing to step me through this that I am going to be happy with. So let's just look at the database section. All right. So we'll start off with a combination of nest.js config, and we'll start out with the database docs. Okay, so let's start out with the database docs, and then when we hit this username, password, database part where we're gonna enter our credentials, I'm going to use my env file, and I'm gonna set up the config, okay? And then we will have another video where we set up a more structured config situation and the database migrations. All right, so here they are saying that type ORM is what is going to be used to have a database with SQL or NoSQL, okay? So we can follow these docs even though they are going to be using MySQL. We're going to use it to set up with Postgres, but because we're setting up type ORM, the specific database you're using is not really that vital. So I am going to copy the install command, and I'm going to go into my terminal for installing things. I'm going to cd into the API folder because I want to install on the backend. I'm going to paste it. I'm not using MySQL 2, I'm using Postgres. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Perfect. All right, and then I can get rid of this. All right, then I'm going to scroll down. So we are going to be setting up the type ORM module. We're setting that within the app module.ts file. So that's this one right here. You can see that they're importing the type ORM module. So we are going to do the same thing. All right. Perfect. All right. We are not using MySQL, so we're going to go ahead and change this to Postgres. Okay. And then we are going to set up our ENV at this point. Okay. So let me briefly pull this out of view so I can set up an ENV copy and then use that to show you how things are going to work. So I am copying, I already have my ENV file set up, so I'm going ahead and I am copying the file so that way I can show you everything in the copy without showing you my sensitive information. All right, I'm just renaming it now. Okay. All right, I'm gonna pull it back up. All right, so this is our ENV copy. So the idea with the ENV copy is that you can push the copy to GitHub, and that way when your team is going to pull down your files and look at it and try to set up everything and get the project up and running on their local computer, they can use the ENV copy to know what type of environment variables they need to put in their ENV. So we have a database host, port, username, password, and name. Okay, that's what's all in my ENV. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring that over to the side so that way I can see. So host is going to be database host. So we are going to do process.env.database host. For port, we are going to do process.env.database port. I said post here, so I will need to go ahead and also check my ENV and make sure that that is not post, and it is, so that is a good catch. All right. Okay, so string is not, so do I need to put this into, oh, well, that's not the, what was this before? Okay, so we want to do parse.int. Parse int. Okay. Process.env.database. All right, so the reason why this is an issue is because basically what it's saying is that the port, the type ORM module is looking for a port that's a number, right? You can see the type here is number. But anything from your ENV file is going to be a string. So this will be a string, and it's saying that you can't have a string where a number should go. So we are going to parse it into a number, okay? Even though technically it is a number, it's a string. Okay, so then we have process.env.database username. And we're going to have process.env.database password and process.env.database name. All right. So perfect. Okay, so our database name is going to be names. So I'm going to go through and I am going to look up if I have a database names, because I will need a database names in order for this to be set up properly. So this is my Postgres. If you look here, this is what we did during the lecture yesterday. But let's go ahead and create a database, and we're going to call it names, and we're going to save it. So now we have a database name, names, that we can use. Okay, so it would be lovely if all of these environment variables were just magically put in. Unfortunately, they are not. That is why we are going to go ahead and set up the configuration. Okay, so when we use environment variables, we need a way to access those variables. Okay, so here it's saying it's common to use env files holding key value pairs where each key represents a value to represent each environment. Totally true, right? A way to get access to those env variables is by setting up the config module exposing the config service. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to install the package that is necessary. So we're cd into the API folder, and then we are going to install the necessary package. It's important to note that internally Nest.js config uses .m. So if you use .env in order to get your environment variables accessible on the back end, the config service is doing that for us. All right, so as you can see, we are going to be using another import into our module. We are going to use config module for root. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to add it, and then I'm going to import and save. All right. So the above code will load and parse an env file from the default location, the project root directory. So let's talk through this a little bit. You might think your project root directory is like this, the to-do list, the whole thing, right? But in Nest.js's mind, the project root directory is the API folder, because that's the folder that the Nest.js CLI created. So that is the project root directory that our env goes into. So as long as your env file is in the root API folder, this config module for root will be able to pick it up. If it's not, you'll have to add this property env file path in order to show where the file should be. Okay, but we don't need to do that. So I am going to turn my logging on for my database so I can see if we are connected, because when I turn this to true, now I will see some, I see some logs showing that we are getting the information, we are connected to the database. So this is awesome. So I'm going to head back now that my configuration is set up to the database documentation, and I'm going to keep going. Okay, so when I was talking about how later we're going to do database migration, it's because when you use synchronize true, that shouldn't be used in production. Now, our applications will not be deployed at this point, but you might want to deploy them later. So we will need to go over database migrations because it's best practice. But for now, we're going to leave synchronize as true, so that way we can just get our database set up and we'll worry about the migrations later. All right, let's keep going. So the next thing it looks like is we need to go ahead and import this. We already have that one. We need to, so this is they're setting up a users module. So they are modularizing their code a little bit, whereas like they're not using the main app.module. So they're importing the users module to use it. We are not going to worry about that right now. So we're going to keep going. All right, let me read this though. So now we can go ahead and we can move on to creating our repositories, and we are going to create our entities. Okay, so within our source folder, we are going to create a file, and we're going to call it name.entity.ts. In SJS, the entity is our table. Okay, so this is like your table schema that you would make. I'm going to just go ahead and copy this whole thing, and I'm going to throw it in. All right, so the primary generated column we're going to keep because we like an ID that is auto-generated. I'm going to change this to just name, and I'm going to go ahead and delete both of these. All right, we are not calling it user, we are going to call it name. So I will change that. Okay. And then I'm going to keep on keeping on. All right, so this is they're explaining that the user's entity is sitting in the user's directory and it's going to connect to the user's module. We're not using a user's module right now, but next we are going to add the entity to our entities array. So I'm going to type in name here, and then I'm going to press save. Okay, as you can see, my logs there's more logs now because I now created a table name. So that's what the synchronize does. The synchronize is going to look at your entities, and it's going to, when you connect to your database, it's going to make sure that your entities, your table schema match what the current state of your database is. So if I come up here and I look into names and I refresh, okay, and then I go into schemas and tables, I should now see name. And then I can go ahead and view. All right, so there's no data, but we now have the correct columns, ID and name. Perfect. All right, let's keep going. All right, so the kind of final piece of the module puzzle is that we also want to import this type ORM module for feature. This module uses for feature method to define which repositories are registered in the current scope. So this is going to allow us to inject here. We're going to be able to inject the repository into a service and then be able to access our database in our service functions. Okay, so that's what that for feature is doing. I'm going to paste it in here. You know what, I'm going to paste it underneath the for root, which I'm not sure it 100% matters, but it will be easier for me to read. And then I'm going to change this to name. Save. All right. So now we have the setup of the database done. Okay, we can now move over to our service file so we can inject the repository so then we can use it. So we are going to add a constructor to our service here. We are going to import. This is going to turn to name. This is going to turn to name. This I'm going to import, and this is going to be names repository. All right, no error messages, so hopefully we are good to go. All right, so when we now have our add name column, okay, all we were doing before is we were just returning the name. But now what we want to do is we want to take the name and save it into the name table of the database. Okay, so let's say that we're going to say await this dot names repository dot save. Then we are going to save the name. Okay, so now when I click add name, it's going to save the name into the repository. All right, so I'm going to say const name equals, and then I'm going to, let's say const name data, and then I'm going to return name data. All right, so let's take a look. I'm going to take out Postman so we can go ahead and see. So when we have to change this to post. I think we are working on 3025 /name. Then in the body, I'm going to do raw JSON. I'm going to say name, test name. All right, then I'm going to click send and refused. So let's go ahead and take a look. Oh, because we are on port 3005, so that would make sense. All right, now we're going to say send. All right, so here we got the data back from the database. We have name, test name was added, and that's ID 1. So let's go ahead and open PG admin. Let's refresh, and yep, test name is added. Okay, awesome. So the next thing we want to do then is we want to think through our applications. So we're not really having a route to add a name to a database, but let's say we did. Let's say we were creating a list of names, okay? And people could just go and add their name to the list, and then we just wanted to view all the names that were added to the list on the front end, okay? So what you would want to do then is you wouldn't want to just return the name because we already had the name. We're the ones who sent it in, right? So instead, we want to return await this dot get names. Okay? So let's walk through this. When we call this controller, we hit the route name. We're passing a name in that we want to be added to the database. Then we go ahead and we add it to the database. We wait for that to get done, and then we say, you know what? I want to go and get all of the names from the database and send them back to the front end, okay? So we need to add here that we want to get all names from database, okay? So we are going to say await. We're going to say const names is equal to await this dot names repository dot find and save. Then we are going to return names. I am going to add a console log in here so that way we can see what names equals, okay? So let's go back to our Postman, and we're going to say test name 2, maybe. Oh, here, test name 2, and then I'm going to send it. All right, so it worked. We added test name 2 to the database, and then we went and said get all the names in the database, where we went and got all the names from the database, and we returned them. So we can clean this up a little bit. So right now we're saving names into a variable and then returning the variable. Instead, we can just say return await this dot names find. All right. So we pretty much have the back end set up. Okay. Let's go ahead and move to the front end, right? Because right now we press the button and yep, look, we got all 3 of our names. But if you see, every time I press the button, it's adding a name, but it's adding a hard-coded Callie to the database. And that is not what we want. We want to be able to type in a name and then have that name sent through. So let's go over here. And instead of name here, we are going to want to add a state for name. So const name set name equals use state. Then let's import use state. All right, so we are going to send the name. So when you say name like this, that is the same thing as saying name. Okay? If the property key is the same as the variable, they're both the same name, then you can just make it shorter by doing that. So let's give that a try by setting name to test name 3 and see if that works. So when we do this, we're saying go get the name from state. Here we're saying set it to test name 3, okay? So when I click it, I should see my test name 2, Callie, and test name 3. All right, let's take a look. Test name 2, Callie, test name 3. Perfect. Okay, so our name works. The next thing we want to do is we want to add an input field so that way we can type in a name. So here I'm going to add an input from Chakra UI. I don't remember all the ins and outs of the input, so I'm going to go input Chakra UI so I can bring it up and make sure I understand. Okay, yeah, this looks good. So I'm going to self-close it, and then placeholder, I'm going to say type in a name. Okay, I want this to look a little bit better, so I'm going to say display flex. Okay, and then I'm going to say gap 2, maybe 4. All right, that looks a little bit better. And then I'm going to put here add name. All right, that looks pretty good. So now I can type in a name and add the name, okay? But you can see now when I type in the name and I add it, it added testing 3 again because we're not changing the state. So we need to take advantage of this set name here. So the way that we are going to do that is we are going to make a const on change function, okay, where we set the name. All right, so how do we do this? When I type in this input, okay, what's happening is an event, okay? So let's start by console logging that event. All right. Okay, so we need to add it to the input. We need to say on change. We are going to call on change. Okay, so anytime I change, so see how I just deleted it? I see that. So here I'm going to type in Callie. So every key I typed in, it's going to change. Now I get this in big event here that is going to have a bunch of information about the event. If I drill down into the target and then the value, you can see that is what I typed in. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for event.target.value. Okay, so let's clear this. I'm going to refresh this, and then I'm going to type in CALIE, and you can see every time I changed what was in the input, my event.target.value got console logged. So now I can just set this name as event.target.value. All right. So now when I click submit, my name should be set. Okay, so let's go ahead and give it a try. I'm going to refresh. All right, I am going to type in Mickey Mouse. I'm going to click add name. I'm going to look at the response, and yay, I see that Mickey Mouse has been added to the database. Let's go ahead and pull up the database. Let's refresh, and yep, everything looks good. All right, so we have successfully connected our front end to our API to our database. All right, we are going to then in the next video start working on cleaning up our code, setting up the config and the database migrations. But for now, I think we're in a really good spot. Happy coding.